The Cat Lady Named Arthur. Part 6. Arthur to Jenffer. By Jenffer J. Chapter 6. Home Economics. The smell of burnt cookies always brought Jenffer and Miss J back to 7th grade, standing frozen in front of Mrs. Halpern's glaring oven. Not just any cookies, her mother's oatmeal raisin recipe, the one with too much cinnamon and a stubborn insistence on margarine instead of butter. The memory clung like flour dust. Jenffer, Miss J said without looking up from the sewing machine, her fingers guiding fabric under the needle with practiced ease, "You ever iron a shirt inside out?" Jennifer blinked, halfway through wrestling a tangled spool of thread. The home EC classroom buzzed around them. Someone was burning popcorn in the microwave again, the scent mixing with the sharp citrus of industrial cleaner. "Why would I?" "Because," Miss J cut in, finally lifting her gaze, "you press the seams flat first. Otherwise, you're just ironing wrinkles into permanence." She nodded toward Jennifer's abandoned sewing project, a lopsided pillowcase with one hem chewed up by the machine. "Like my mother's oatmeal cookies. Some mistakes bake in." The thread snapped between Jennifer's fingers as the classroom PA crackled to life. "Miss Jameson to the office." "Bring your," static swallowed the rest. Miss J stood abruptly, sending her chair screeching back. She hesitated just long enough to pluck Jennifer's ruined fabric from the machine. "Finish this for me," she said, pressing the warm cloth into Jennifer's palm. "Slip-stitch the opening. And for God's sake, mind the tension dial this time." Jennifer stared at the half-sewn mystery project, not a pillowcase after all, but a small velvet pouch with strange embroidered symbols along one edge. The classroom door swung shut behind Miss J with a finality that made Jennifer's stomach drop. Across the room, Tamika Rodriguez hissed through her teeth as her sewing machine jammed again. "Yo Jameson, what's this dial even?" She froze mid-sentence, noticing the empty teacher's chair. The entire class seemed to hold its breath as realization spread. Miss J had never once left them unsupervised in 3 years of home EC. Jennifer turned the velvet pouch over in her hands. The embroidered symbols glinted under fluorescent lights, not thread, but tiny metallic stitches that pricked her fingertips. A faint scent clung to the fabric beneath the classroom's lemon disinfectant, bergamot and something earthy, like the potting soil in Miss J's windowsill herb garden. Tamika's sewing machine whirred back to life with a violent sputter. "Hell no," she announced to the room, yanking her project free. "I'm not getting written up because Halpern walks in here and finds us running wild." The click of her machine's power switch seemed to cue a mass exodus, students abandoning half-pinned skirt hems and doe-strewn workstations, clustering by the door like spooked livestock. Jennifer stayed rooted, tracing the raised embroidery on the pouch. The symbols formed no alphabet she recognized, angular marks that made her fingertips tingle unpleasantly, as if brushing against a live wire. The velvet parted slightly where Miss J's hasty stitching had given way, revealing a glimpse of dried something. Pods? Teeth? A gust of wind slapped the classroom's lone open window against its frame, sending Tamika shrieking into the hall. Jennifer barely flinched. The air smelled suddenly of thunderstorms and wet pavement, though the sky outside remained cloudless. The velvet pouch pulsed against her palm, not a heartbeat, but something worse. A vibration like a dentist's drill transmitted through bone. Jennifer pried the opening wider. Inside lay 3 shriveled walnut shells, their surfaces etched with the same metallic symbols. One had cracked open, revealing a wisp of gray down clinging to its interior. Tamika's voice cut through the murmuring classmates at the door. "Jameson, your teacher just hauled us out the side exit with Mr. Halpern's fire extinguisher." She pointed toward the parking lot, where Miss J was wrestling the red cylinder into her rusted Volvo. "What the actual?" Jennifer's fingers spasmed around the pouch as the last walnut shell split with an audible pop. The gray down fluttered out, disintegrating midair into a fine powder that stung her nostrils, gunpowder and spoiled milk. The remaining shells vibrated violently, their etched symbols glowing dull orange like cooling embers. "Shit." Tamika's Converse squeaked against linoleum as she backpedaled into the hall. "That's not," the fire alarm cut her off, its shriek drowning out the classroom's collective gasp. Jenffer barely registered it, her entire focus was on the third shell now cracking apart, revealing a single curled feather the color of tarnished silver. Miss J's voice echoed from the parking lot, sharp as shattered glass, "Jenffer. The mint." The word sliced through the alarm's wail with impossible clarity. Jennifer's head snapped up just as Darren Lee ducked behind the cooking station's industrial fridge, his hands cupped around something that reeked of skunk and spearmint. "Those boys think they're slick," Miss J muttered, materializing at Jennifer's elbow with her sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms streaked with soot. She snatched the velvet pouch from Jennifer's numb fingers and appended it over Darren's abandoned mixing bowl. The walnut shells clattered against stainless steel, their symbols now glowing faintly green. "Sex ed gets condoms on bananas while we're over here playing Chopped with someone's ditch mint stash." Jenffer gagged as the reek hit her, part skunk, part the menthol blast of Miss J's herb garden mint leaves crushed beneath combat boots. Darren's special ingredient clung to the edges of the mixing bowl in sticky clumps that looked suspiciously like the resinous gunk clogging the home EC sink last month. "Sex ed gets rubbers on bananas," Miss J muttered, stirring the bowl's contents with a wooden spoon snapped in half, "while we're out here playing Gordon Ramsay with ditchweed." The walnut shells rattled against steel, their etched symbols flaring emerald as crushed mint released its oils. Jenffer coughed into her elbow. The stench wasn't just skunky anymore. Underlying notes of damp soil and electrical fires made her eyes water. Across the room, Darren's abandoned mixing bowl bubbled ominously, its surface shimmering with an iridescent sheen like gasoline on pavement. "Sex ed gets rubbers on bananas," Miss J repeated through gritted teeth, using the splintered spoon to scrape greenish residue from the bowl's rim. A glob hit the linoleum with a wet plop and immediately began eating through the wax. "Meanwhile, we're conducting exorcisms with Walmart brand sage." She jerked her chin toward the emergency exit where Tamika's sneaker squeaks echoed down the hall. "Should have let them keep the condom demonstrations. At least those don't summon whatever the hell this is." Jenffer backed away as the mixture in the bowl began spiraling counterclockwise of its own accord, dragging stray cookie crumbs and a loose button into its vortex. The stench intensified, burnt hair layered over the menthol assault. She bumped into the abandoned Singer machine, its needle suddenly plunging up and down through empty air with a mechanical shriek. Miss J swore violently, grabbing Jennifer's wrist just as the first walnut shell detonated with a sound like a popped balloon. Shards pinged off the stainless steel fridge, embedding in the bulletin board's nutrition pyramid poster. The remaining shells rattled faster, their glow shifting from green to an alarming violet. "Apron!" Miss J barked, yanking Jenffer behind the industrial mixer. The polyester fabric of Jennifer's apron lifted against her stomach as static electricity crackled through the room. Across the aisle, Tamika's abandoned sewing project burst into blue flame, the polyester batting curling like blackened fingernails. Darren's mixing bowl tipped over with a metallic clang, its contents slithering across the linoleum in glowing rivulets. The liquid moved with purpose, avoiding the tile grout lines as it formed angular patterns that mirrored the pouch's embroidery. Jennifer's vision blurred, her eyes watering not from smoke, but from the sudden, overwhelming scent of her grandmother's attic, that peculiar mix of mothballs and dried lavender. Miss J jammed the splintered spoon into the nearest electrical outlet. Sparks arced up her arm, illuminating the tribal tattoos Jenffer had never noticed before, thick black lines that squirmed like earthworms under fluorescent light. The fire alarm's warbling pitch dropped suddenly, warping into something disturbingly melodic. Jennifer's teeth vibrated as the remaining walnut shells levitated, rotating slowly above the spreading liquid. Their violet glow pulsed in time with Miss J's humming, an off-key rendition of Home on the Range that made the mixing bowls tremble on their shelves. The liquid pattern solidified into a perfect circle just as Tamika's flaming sewing project collapsed into ash, revealing a brass key that hadn't been there before. Jenffer reached for it instinctively, but Miss J's soot-streaked hand clamped down on her wrist. "Not unless you want your fingerprints melted off, Jameson." Her grip was furnace hot, the tribal tattoos now writhing up her forearm like charred vines. The floating walnut shells aligned themselves with the keyhole-shaped scorch mark now seared into the linoleum. Darren's abandoned mixing bowl rattled violently, then cracked clean down the middle as something inside it hissed, not steam, but words in a language that made Jennifer's fillings ache. The classroom's clock hand spun backward, frosting over with jagged ice crystals even as sweat dripped down Jennifer's temples. Miss J exhaled sharply through her nose, the sound a bull makes before charging, and stomped her boot heel onto the brass key. It didn't bend. It sank 3 inches into solid tile like it was passing through pudding. "Christ on a pogo stick," she muttered, prying it free with a wet pop. The key dripped something syrupy and warm that smelled distinctly of pennyroyal and regret. Jennifer's ears popped as the walnut shells inverted themselves, their violet glow collapsing inward like dying stars. The embroidered symbols on Miss J's forearms pulsed in unison, the tattoos writhing into new configurations, a crown of thorns around her left wrist, something that looked suspiciously like a barcode on her right. Across the room, the emergency sprinklers kicked on, spraying liquid that wasn't water. It hit Darren's congealing mixture with a sizzle, sending up tendrils of smoke that twisted into perfect cursive letters spelling apologies for the inconvenience. Tamika chose that moment to barrel back into the classroom, wielding a fire extinguisher like a battering ram. She skidded to a halt, her gaze darting between the floating shells and Miss J's now glowing forearms. "Nope," she declared, pivoting on one heel. The fire extinguisher nozzle caught on the doorframe, discharging a blast of white powder that crystallized midair into thousands of tiny snowflakes shaped. Were those runes? Jennifer barely had time to register the symbols before they dissolved with a sound like radio static. The classroom lights flickered violently, the fluorescents popping one by one in showers of glass that hung suspended like jagged constellations. Miss J's tattoos pulsed brighter, the barcode now scrolling numbers too fast to read, the crown of thorns dripping something black and viscous onto her combat boots. Tamika's sneaker squeaked against the powdered linoleum as she backpedaled. Oh hell no, the fire extinguisher slipped from her grip, hitting the ground with a metallic clang that reverberated like a gong. The sound wave rippled outward, warping the floating glass shards into perfect silver teardrops that reflected not the classroom, but some vast library with leather-bound books chained to the shelves. Jennifer's knees buckled as the inverted walnut shells began humming, not a sound, but a vibration that traveled up her molars and settled behind her eyes. The classroom walls breathed inward, plaster cracking to reveal patches of something scaly and iridescent beneath. Miss J's barcode tattoo beeped once, sharply, and she grimaced. "Damn it, we're on the clock now." Tamika's abandoned fire extinguisher rolled toward the spreading liquid circle, its metal casing warping like taffy as it crossed the perimeter. Jennifer watched in horrified fascination as the extinguisher's handle elongated into something disturbingly finger-like, the nozzle twisting into a crude mouth that gasped, "Thursdays. Always Thursdays," before melting into the linoleum. Miss J grabbed Jennifer's elbow with her barcode hand, the touch left a temporary tattoo of numbers seared into Jennifer's skin that smelled of scorched plastic and birthday cake. "Listen close," she hissed, pressing the brass key into Jennifer's palm. It burned cold, like holding dry ice wrapped in velvet. "When the third bell rings, you jam this into." Tamika's scream cut through Miss J's instructions. The fire extinguisher's melted remains had reconstituted into something with too many joints, its nozzle mouth working soundlessly as it dragged itself toward them using what might have been arms or possibly just very enthusiastic spatulas. The classroom's emergency sprinklers now rained something thick and honey-colored that congealed around Darren's abandoned mixing bowl, forming a perfect scale model of the school cafeteria, right down to the mystery meatloaf special glowing under the lights. "Budget meals," Miss J muttered, yanking Jennifer backward as the thing made of fire extinguisher parts lurched closer. Its metal fingers left smoking divots in the linoleum where they gripped. "They teach you to stretch a pound of hamburger across 35 logs at camp meals, but nobody warns you about the dimensional entities that manifest when you mix ditchweed with embroidered summoning pouches." She jabbed the brass key toward the creature's chest. It dodged with unsettling grace, its nozzle mouth distending to swallow the keyhole. Jennifer's temporary tattoo burned hotter as the classroom's emergency sprinklers rained down honey-thick fluid that congealed into floating globules midair. Each sphere contained a snapshot of home EC disasters past, Tamika's infamous exploding pressure cooker from sophomore year, Darren's attempt at flambe that took out an entire workstation, the time someone accidentally used salt instead of sugar in the angel food cake. The globules orbited the fire extinguisher creature like deranged meal prep reminders. Miss J's barcode tattoo emitted a shrill beep as she shoved Jenffer behind the industrial mixer. 30 seconds till lunch period, she hissed, yanking open the appliance's side panel to reveal wiring that definitely didn't belong in a standard-issue Hobart. You ever budget 5 servings from a 3-pound roast? Jenffer blinked at the non-sequitur as Miss J began splicing wires with her teeth. The fire extinguisher creature lurched closer, its nozzle mouth regurgitating the brass key in a spray of what smelled suspiciously like overcooked Salisbury steak. Then out of the blue, Miss J spat copper wiring onto the floor, the Sholi Karzi that odd said. She punctuated this by shoving a mint cookie into Jennifer's mouth so abruptly it crunched against her molars. The taste exploded, not peppermint, but something sharp and medicinal that made her vision swim. Across the classroom, Tamika's abandoned sewing machine began stitching the floating honey globules together into a quilt of culinary disasters. It was Give a Cookie to Your Classmate Day. Jenffer realized this the same moment she noticed every student's discarded apron now bore a freshly embroidered patch of a grinning walrus holding a tray of burnt snickerdoodles. The fire extinguisher creature paused mid-lurch, its nozzle mouth twitching as the scent of Miss J's herb garden mint leaves overwhelmed the skunkweed stench. For Biddleweed, Miss J hissed, jamming another medicinal cookie into Jennifer's mouth. The taste seared her sinuses, mint crossed with battery acid and the ghost of lemon pledge. Across the room, Darren's abandoned mixing bowl belched a cloud of iridescent smoke that solidified into floating letters. Do not feed the demonic entities use for K9 try an ing next week. Jenffer choked on cookie dust as Tamika's sewing machine stitched faster, threads whipping through the air like fishing lines snagging invisible prey. The fire extinguisher creature twitched violently, its nozzle mouth spewing greenish foam that hardened midair into tiny, perfect fondant roses. They smelled like the inside of Miss Halpern's purse, Chanel No. 5 and something mammalian. For Biddleweed, Darren whimpered from beneath the pastry station, his fingers clutching a ziploc of suspicious oregano. They told us it was just, like, supercharged mint for cooking projects. The baggie trembled in his grip, its contents glowing faintly ultraviolet under the classroom's flickering lights. Miss J's barcode tattoo emitted a series of rapid beeps. She grabbed Darren by the collar, hauling him up just as the fire extinguisher creature's fondant roses began sprouting tiny, needle-like teeth. Boy, what in the name of Betty Crocker's unholy cookbook did you harvest this from? She shook the baggie, releasing a puff of glitter that immediately etched Pythagorean theorems into the stainless steel fridge. Jennifer's tongue went numb from the medicinal cookie. The classroom walls rippled like gelatin, revealing brief flashes of what looked like a commercial kitchen stretching into infinity, endless rows of industrial mixers manned by shadowy figures in hairnets. Tamika's sewing machine was now embroidering the air itself, threads pulling taut between floating globules to form a cat's cradle of culinary disasters. Not mint, Miss J growled, shaking Darren harder. His sneakers left the ground as she lifted him eye level with the fire extinguisher creature, which had begun convulsing, its metal limbs folding in on themselves like origami gone wrong. That's ours catnip, then you mixed weed with this. The kind she grows in lead-lined planters behind the auto shop. Jennifer's vision swam with double images, the classroom superimposed over an endless kitchen where shadowy figures stirred cauldrons of something that glowed like molten licorice. Her tongue tingled, the medicinal cookie dissolving into a taste like aluminum foil and regret. Tamika's sewing thread sliced through the floating fondant roses, which burst into clouds of pollen that spelled "Do not inhale" in perfect cursive before dispersing. The fire extinguisher creature folded itself into a perfect cube, its nozzle mouth pressed flat against one side like a grotesque postage stamp. Darren's sneakers dangled above it as Miss J shook him like a maraca, his ziploc of mint scattering leaves that sprouted tiny legs midair and scurried under the refrigerators. Catnip? Jenffer slurred through her numb lips. The word tasted wrong, not English, but something older, with too many teeth. Tamika's sewing machine stitched the last floating globule into the quilt of culinary disasters just as the final bell rang. The sound warped, stretching into a drone that vibrated Jennifer's fillings. Around them, classmates blinked dazedly, gathering half-finished projects with glazed expressions. They moved in unison, shuffling toward the exits like sleepwalkers, their aprons flapping behind them, each now bearing that grinning walrus patch. Jenffer tried to scream a warning, but her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth, fused there by the lingering taste of medicinal cookie. The staff stayed behind. Miss J's tattoos pulsed in time with the flickering fluorescence as she blocked the doorway, her combat boots leaving smoking footprints on the linoleum. Behind her, Principal Halpern materialized from the honey-thick sprinkler rain, her pearls glowing like phosphorus. The fire extinguisher cube rattled violently at their feet, its postage stamp mouth chewing soundlessly at Darren's dangling shoelaces. Jennifer's tongue unstuck with a wet pop. What did we? Miss J clamped a hand over her mouth. The barcode tattoo seared Jennifer's cheek, its digits scrolling too fast to read. Around them, students shuffled out in eerie synchronization, their walrus-patched aprons swaying like pendulums. Tamika moved mechanically, her usually expressive face slack as she dropped the fire extinguisher nozzle, now just ordinary plastic, into the bin. The last student's sneaker squeaked across the threshold. The door clicked shut. Principal Halpern's pearls illuminated the honey-slick floor as she stepped forward, her kitten heels leaving perfect divots in the linoleum. Something about the way the liquid light pooled around those indentations made Jennifer's stomach lurch. They weren't footprints. They were teeth marks. Miss J's barcode tattoo emitted a sound like a supermarket scanner. Gone feral. She peeled her hand from Jennifer's mouth, leaving behind a sticky residue that smelled of burnt sugar and industrial cleaner. Now, she said, cracking her knuckles with a series of pops that echoed like gunshots in the empty classroom, let's discuss what you children have been feeding my cat. Jenffer woke with a gasp, her tongue still numb, the school nurse's fluorescent lights stabbing her pupils like ice picks. The minty aftertaste lingered, but now laced with something medicinal and wrong, like chewing a thermometer dipped in Listerine. Next to her on the stiff vinyl cot, Miss J lay sprawled in a pose that suggested unconsciousness, though her combat boots were neatly aligned and her tattooed fingers twitched in deliberate patterns against the cotton sheet. The nurse's office smelled of antiseptic and the peculiar, metallic tang of overheated electronics. Jennifer's gaze snagged on Miss J's forearm where the barcode tattoo now scrolled numbers at half speed, 423.18, 423.19, 423.20, counting up like a deli ticket dispenser stuck in purgatory. A crumpled apron lay between them, its grinning walrus patch now partially unraveled to reveal stitches that spelled "Do not trust the lunch lady" in jagged red thread. Jennifer's tongue finally unstuck with a wet crackle. The fire extinguisher. Miss J's tattooed fingers spasmed against the sheet, stitching invisible patterns that made the nurse's desk lamp flicker. Up close, the barcode wasn't ink at all, tiny segmented creatures writhed beneath her skin, each forming a digit that clicked into place like abacus beads. Jenffer watched number 423.21 tumble into position just as the nurse's wall clock emitted a sound like a soda can being crushed. Wow, Jenffer whispered to herself, tongue still thick with that medicinal aftertaste. I'm in a dream. She pinched her wrist, no pain, just the sensation of pressing fingers through cold gelatin. The walrus patch on the crumpled apron winked at her, one embroidered eye now sewn shut with black thread. Miss J's tattoos pulsed in sync with the nurse's office clock, each tick stretching longer than the last. Jenffer watched the second hand freeze mid-sweep, quivering like a compass needle near something magnetic. The fluorescent lights above them dimmed, not flickering, but breathing, their glow receding like tidewater before pulling back in with a soft, organic gurgle. Dreams don't smell like industrial disinfectant and burnt rye toast, Miss J muttered without opening her eyes. Her barcode tattoo scrolled faster now, 427.91, 427.92, numbers that smelled faintly of overproofed sourdough starter. A drop of condensation fell from the ceiling, landing perfectly between Jennifer's eyebrows with the viscosity of raw egg white. Jenffer blinked as the droplet slithered down her nose. The nurse's office cot felt less like vinyl and more like the fleshy underside of some enormous tongue beneath her, warm, slightly abrasive, and pulsing in time with Miss J's tattoo. Miss J's eyelids snapped open, revealing pupils shaped like tiny rolling pins. "You swallowed 3 grams of weed in fake cookie," she said, voice distorted as if speaking through a food processor. Which means, her words cut off as the nurse's blood pressure cuff unspooled from the wall like an escaping garden hose, its Velcro straps clicking like insect mandibles. Jenffer tried to sit up, but the cot's vinyl surface had grown sticky, not adhesive, but actively hungry, tendrils of synthetic fiber curling around her wrists like overcooked spaghetti. The walrus apron between them levitated, rotating slowly as its embroidered stitches rearranged themselves into a new message: "Feeding time is at 2:37. Miss J's rolling pin pupils dilated as she grabbed Jennifer's forearm, her grip transmitting a series of vibrations that resolved into words along Jennifer's bones. "Don't look at the clock." The nurse's wall clock now had too many hands, some wooden, some fleshy, one that appeared to be a severed celery stalk, all twitching toward the 2:37 position. Jennifer's numb tongue tasted pennies as the cot's tendrils tightened. The floating walrus apron emitted a sound like a vacuum-sealed jar popping open, releasing a puff of flour that spelled apron-only zone in midair before congealing into tiny dough people. They scrambled up Jennifer's legs with piping bag fingers, leaving buttercream fingerprints that burned like dry ice. Miss J's rolling pin pupils spun faster as she wrenched Jennifer's wrist toward her own barcode tattoo. The segmented creatures beneath her skin parted like a curtain, revealing a subcutaneous layer of, were those recipe cards? Jenffer glimpsed looping cursive detailing, 7-pound student desperation, and 3 tablespoons extracted tears before the numbers realigned with a wet smack. The dough people reached Jennifer's collarbone, their buttercream fingers now sewing her mouth shut with strands of dental floss that tasted of peppermint and panic. Across the room, the nurse's blood pressure cuff reared up like a cobra, its Velcro fangs gleaming. Miss J snarled and bit clean through the tendrils pinning Jenffer. The vinyl strands bled motor oil and screamed in whale song. Jennifer's eyelids peeled back involuntarily as the walrus apron unfolded itself into a 10-foot tapestry of cafeteria horror scenes. Thursday's mystery meatloaf writhing with visible gristle veins, gelatin cubes containing suspended fruit flies like amber fossils. The embroidery. Threads hummed at a frequency that vibrated Jennifer's fillings loose. She spat a molar into her palm, the tooth sprouted tiny legs and scuttled up her arm whispering lunch period announcements in reverse. Miss J's rolling pin pupils elongated into baguettes as she ripped the dental floss sutures from Jennifer's lips with her teeth. The strands dissolved into vapor that smelled of expired lunch milk and industrial bleach. "Breathe through your nose," she commanded, just as the dough people reached Jennifer's ears, piping bag fingers injecting buttercream directly into her eustachian tubes. The world distorted into a candy-coated nightmare where the nurse's stethoscope slithered across the floor like an overgrown licorice whip. Jennifer's vision kaleidoscoped, every blink revealed another layer of the edible horror. The medicinal mint wasn't just in her mouth anymore, it was her mouth, her taste buds blooming into actual peppermint leaves that rustled against her teeth. She tried to scream, but her vocal cords vibrated at the exact frequency of a stand mixer set to whip. The dough people had sewn her hands into oven mitts stitched from what appeared to be pages torn from a 1970s home EC textbook, the diagrams for proper table setting now crawling across her skin like animated tattoos. Miss J's barcode tattoo screeched, an actual sound this time, like a grocery scanner short-circuiting, as she backhanded a dough person mid-stitch. It exploded into powdered sugar that spelled overproofed in midair before raining down as tiny fondant skulls. "Nobody takes 3 grams of forbidden weed in a damn snickerdoodle," she snarled, her voice oscillating between human and something that vibrated Jennifer's sternum. "Not even the auto shop kids during finals week." Her rolling pin pupils had developed blisters now, each one a tiny bubble of what looked like vegetable oil reflecting the nurse's flickering fluorescence. Jennifer's molars chattered, not from cold, but because they were actively migrating toward each other like magnetic chiclets. The last dough person straddled her nose, piping bag fingers squeezing buttercream directly into her sinuses. The taste was wrong, not vanilla, but library paste mixed with the ghost of a middle school cafeteria's fish stick Friday. Her uvula spasmed, trying to reject something that wasn't technically there. Maury, she slurred through lips that felt vacuum-sealed in plastic wrap. Whose? Miss J's rolling pin pupils dilated into baguettes again. She grabbed Jennifer's face with both hands, her palms smelled of industrial disinfectant and something mammalian, like the inside of a well-used kneading glove. Not who, what, she corrected, thumbs pressing hard enough to leave temporary dimples in Jennifer's cheeks. Jennifer blinked. Her vision swam with afterimages of the nurse's office cot, not just vinyl, but something breathing beneath it. A wet, rhythmic pulse against her back that wasn't entirely unpleasant, like being cradled by a giant squid made of warm bread dough. Maury, she repeated dumbly, the word sticking to her teeth like caramel. Miss J's thumbs pressed harder into her cheeks. Not who, kid. What? Her breath smelled of burnt coffee and the metallic tang of fresh tattoo ink. The numbers on her forearm scrolled faster, 429.01, 429.02, each digit clicking into place with the sound of a microwave beep. Jennifer blinked crust from her eyelashes. Her mouth tasted like someone had stuffed it with dryer lint soaked in peppermint extract. Maury, she croaked again, the word vibrating oddly in her sinuses. Beneath her, the nurse's cot pulsed like the gills of a sleeping dragon. Miss J loomed over her, rolling pin pupils spinning lazily. A single blister on her left pupil burst, releasing a droplet of vegetable oil that sizzled when it hit Jennifer's forehead. You okay? She asked, voice alternating between normal and something that made Jennifer's fillings itch. The barcode tattoo scrolled relentlessly, 430.15, 430.16, numbers that smelled faintly of scorched pie crust. Jennifer tried to sit up, but her limbs felt like they'd been stuffed with wet cotton batting. Dream, she croaked, her tongue still numb and tasting of industrial-strength mouthwash. The nurse's cot beneath her pulsed hungrily, vinyl tendrils retracting with wet, sucking sounds. A dough person's severed buttercream finger twitched near her elbow, piping out tiny letters that spelled don't before dissolving into a puddle of vanilla-scented regret. Miss J's rolling pin pupils contracted as she peeled a strip of medical tape from Jennifer's forehead. It came away with a sound like Velcro separating from the fabric of reality. You kept trying to bake things with your hands, she muttered, examining the tape's underside where Jennifer's sweat had etched a perfect recipe for 2 cups existential dread, sifted. The classroom clock ticked backwards overhead, its hands now shaped like oven mitts grasping at nothing. Jennifer's tongue flopped in her mouth like a dying goldfish. Did I eat a sewing machine? The words tasted of aluminum foil and regret. Her fingers tingled with phantom stitches, each knuckle remembering the sensation of piercing steel threads through clouds of floating fondant roses. Across the room, Tamika's walrus-patched apron twitched on its hook like a restless animal. Miss J pressed a lukewarm juice box to Jennifer's lips. The straw bent at a suspicious angle, not plastic, but something fibrous that pulsed between her teeth. You're fine, she lied. Her rolling pin pupils had reverted to normal, though her barcode tattoo now scrolled ingredient lists for 1 part student terror and a dash of institutional neglect. Jennifer blinked against the fluorescent lights that hummed like angry bees. Her tongue still felt like it had been vacuum-sealed in a freezer bag. I dreamed, she started, but the words congealed in her throat. The principal's office smelled of stale coffee and something deeper, industrial-strength cleaner mixed with the ghost of 1,000 forgotten lunches. Miss J sat beside her, rolling pin pupils tracking Principal Halpern as she clicked her kitten heels across linoleum patterned with tooth marks. The get-well-soon card on the desk pulsed faintly, its glitter glue signature shifting from your friends in home EC to don't trust the lunch lady every time Jennifer blinked. Her first day back. The halls buzzed differently now, not just with chatter, but with frequencies that made her fillings vibrate. Classmates nodded at her with glassy smiles, their aprons pristine except for the faintest walrus-shaped stains near the hem. Darren lingered by his locker, scattering oregano that sprouted tiny legs and scurried into the vents before it could be confiscated. Jennifer's tongue still tasted of medicinal mint and something metallic, like licking a battery wrapped in aluminum foil. Miss J intercepted her at the home EC doorway, her combat boots leaving faint smoke trails on the linoleum. Feeling better? She asked, rolling pin pupils spinning lazily. Her barcode tattoo pulsed 437.21, a number that smelled inexplicably of burnt popcorn and industrial glue. Behind her, the classroom hummed with wrongness, sewing machines stitching air, mixers kneading invisible dough, and Tamika's walrus-patched apron floating 6 inches off its hook like a ghostly afterimage. Jennifer's tongue still felt 2 sizes too large, her taste buds permanently altered, everything now carried the faint aftertaste of medicinal cookies and the electric tang of something that shouldn't exist. Her fingers twitched involuntarily, recalling phantom stitches from her fever dreams. I think, she lied, eyeing the fire extinguisher bolted to the wall. Its nozzle twitched like a sleeping cat's tail. The home EC room smelled different after her week-long absence. Not just the usual flour and fabric softener, but something darker beneath, burnt sugar and the ozone crackle of overworked appliances. Miss J's rolling pin pupils tracked her as she shuffled to her workstation, where someone had left a perfect mint cookie on her sewing machine. The icing swirls formed a walrus face. Jennifer's fingers trembled reaching for it. The cookie emitted a faint hum, vibrating against the metal throat of the Singer machine. Across the room, Darren's apron straps twitched like insect antennae, his usual oregano replaced by a suspiciously luminescent parsley. Tamika's disaster quilt now covered half the back wall, its embroidered scenes of exploding cafeterias subtly animated, steam rising from stitched soup pots, embroidered flames licking at the edges. Miss J leaned against the demonstration counter, rolling pin pupils dilating as she peeled an orange with her tattooed fingers. Each curl of rind fell with unnatural precision, arranging itself into tiny warning signs. Do not ingest, contains memory alterants, not FDA approved for human consumption. The classroom clock ticked syrup slow, its hands bending like overproofed pretzels toward what should have been third period. Jennifer's notebook opened itself to a page filled with fever dream doodles, walrus faces with too many teeth, aprons stitched from what looked like human skin, and a detailed schematic of the fire extinguisher labeled feeding schedule. She slammed it shut, but the pages kept rustling like something alive inside. Across the room, Tamika's embroidery hoop contained a scene that hadn't been there before, Jennifer herself, asleep in the nurse's office with vines of dental floss growing from her mouth. The mint cookie on her sewing machine had multiplied overnight. A neat pyramid of them now occupied her workstation, each frosted with different ominous symbols, a bicycle with square wheels, a keyhole leaking smoke, a walrus wearing Miss J's combat boots. Jennifer's tongue remembered that medicinal burn against her will, saliva flooding her mouth with the phantom taste of industrial-strength mouthwash and regret. Darren's desk emitted a faint green glow from beneath his textbook, his usual oregano replaced by something that pulsed like a heartbeat. He caught her staring and grinned, teeth briefly too sharp. Missed you, he said, voice layered with something that buzzed against Jennifer's eardrums. His apron straps twitched independent of his shoulders, knotting themselves into complicated sailor's knots. The mint cookie on Jennifer's sewing machine had sprouted tiny legs. It scuttled in a frantic circle before collapsing into crumbs that spelled don't in shaky cursive. The Singer machine beneath it whirred to life on its own, needle punching through empty air where thread should have been, stitching something invisible with metallic clicks that echoed in Jennifer's fillings. Her first day back smelled wrong. Not just the usual home EC melange of burnt sugar and fabric softener, but something deeper, the acrid tang of overheated appliances and the meaty musk of something that had died behind the drywall. Jennifer's fingers trembled as she reached for her apron. The walrus patch had migrated to the inside lining, its embroidered whiskers now sewn with black thread that wasn't thread at all but slender veins plucked from some unnameable organ. Her sewing machine hummed a greeting, or a threat. The Singer's throat vibrated with stitches she didn't remember making, tiny, precise rows of don't sewn directly into the air above the needle plate. The mint cookie pyramid had doubled overnight, each treat now branded with a different faded caution symbol, a crossed-out eye, a skull wearing a hairnet, a key drowning in liquid mercury. Jennifer's vision kaleidoscoped, the classroom fractured into overlapping realities, home EC. As it should be, Tamika hemming skirts, Darren measuring vanilla, and home EC as it was, Tamika's embroidery hoop containing live footage of the nurse's office cot, Darren's measuring cup filled with pulsing green liquid that licked the rim like a eager tongue. Her fingers spasmed around a piping bag that hadn't been there seconds ago, squeezing buttercream rosettes that screamed in tiny, frosting-coated voices. "I can't take this anymore." Jennifer's voice tore through dimensions, shredding the fragile membrane between realities. The sound waves crystallized midair, forming jagged sugar shards that rained down onto Miss J's rolling pin pupils. One pierced her left iris, releasing a viscous drip of vegetable oil that sizzled through the linoleum like acid. Miss J caught Jennifer by the collar as her knees dissolved into gelatin. "Your mind isn't too far," she lied through teeth that momentarily sharpened into pastry piping tips. "Just mislaid. Like car keys." The nurse's office door swung open without being touched, revealing walls that pulsed like the sides of a giant mixing bowl. Inside, the cot had grown new appendages, vinyl tentacles that suctioned at the air with wet smacks. Jennifer's tears sizzled against her cheeks, evaporating into tiny clouds of peppermint-scented steam. "It's inside my fillings," she gasped, clawing at her molars as they throbbed with the rhythm of a stand mixer set to whip. The walrus apron's embroidered message now read, "Your brain is overproofed," in stitches that squirmed like earthworms. Miss J dragged her through the hallway by the scruff of her home EC blouse, past lockers breathing in sync with Jennifer's hyperventilation, past Darren's green-glowing oregano sprinting on spider legs toward the vents. The nurse's office door yawned open before they reached it, the frosted glass panel melting into liquid sugar that dripped upward. Jennifer's skull pulsed with the rhythm of industrial mixers. "It's in my teeth," she sobbed, tasting copper and the ghost of that damned medicinal mint. The walrus patch inside her apron stroked her ribs with embroidered flippers, whispering recipes for disaster in cursive thread. Her vision fractured, one eye seeing Miss J's barcode tattoo scrolling 438.91, brain baking temperature, the other watching her own hand stitch phantom seams through the fabric of reality. Miss J hauled her toward the nurse's office, Jennifer's knees leaving twin trails of powdered sugar and something darker that sizzled against the linoleum. "Your mind's just proofing," Miss J lied, her rolling pin pupils spinning like unattended stand mixers. The nurse's office door dilated like a hungry mouth, exhaling air that smelled of antiseptic and freshly frosted lies. Inside, the cot had grown new appendages, vinyl tendrils that suctioned at Jennifer's wrists with the same relentless hunger as a bread dough starter gone sentient. Jennifer's skull pulsed with phantom stitches, each thought sewn shut with dental floss that tasted of industrial mint and middle school despair. The walrus patch inside her apron stroked her ribs with embroidered flippers, whispering recipes for disaster in perfect Palmer method cursive. Her vision fractured, one eye seeing Miss J's barcode tattoo scrolling 439.02, brain baking temperature critical, the other watching her own hand stitch phantom seams through the fabric of reality. The nurse's office walls respired around her, vinyl tiles expanding and contracting like the gills of a giant aquatic predator. The cot had grown new appendages, vinyl tentacles that suctioned at Jennifer's wrists with the same relentless hunger as a sourdough starter gone sentient. "Your mind's just proofing," Miss J lied, her rolling pin pupils spinning like unattended stand mixers. A single blister on her left iris burst, releasing a droplet of vegetable oil that sizzled through Jennifer's hospital gown like acid. Jennifer's tongue flopped in her mouth like a dying goldfish. "Did I eat a sewing machine?" The words tasted of aluminum foil and regret. Her fingers tingled with phantom stitches, each knuckle remembering the sensation of piercing steel threads through clouds of floating fondant roses. Across the room, Tamika's walrus-patched apron twitched on its hook like a restless animal. The nurse, or what was left of her, leaned over Jennifer's cot with pupils that pulsed between feline slits and rolling pin voids. "Some of the cat ladies go like this for weeks," she said, voice layered with the sound of purring machinery. Her stethoscope slithered around Jennifer's wrist like a living thing, the bell frosting over with rime of crystallized peppermint extract. 2, maybe 3. Depends how much they lick the mixing bowls. Behind her, the EKG machine printed out continuous sheets of buttercream frosted cardiograms, each spike decorated with candied violets. Jennifer's tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth, not dry, but laminated there by some unseen confectioner's brush. Between her teeth, tiny gears ground away at the remnants of sanity, spitting out screw-shaped peppermint shrapnel. "Cat, ladies," she managed, the words coming out in puffs of powdered sugar. The nurse's name tag melted and reformed, Dr. Whiskers, before dripping onto Jennifer's hospital gown in edible silver ink. The nurse, Dr. Whiskers, blinked vertically. Her pupils pulsed between feline slits and the spinning augers of industrial mixers. "Oh honey," she purred, the sound vibrating through Jennifer's ribs like a stand mixer set to need. "You didn't think home EC teachers were born with rolling pin eyes, did you?" Her stethoscope coiled tighter around Jennifer's wrist, the bell frosting over with jagged sugar crystals. Behind her, the EKG machine coughed up another strip of buttercream tracings, this one decorated with candied violets spelling proofing stage 2. Jennifer's teeth chattered, mint-flavored sparks flying between her molars. The nurse's name tag melted again, reforming as Chef Whiskers in looping cursive made of edible silver thread. Somewhere beyond the vinyl-tiled gills of the breathing walls, Jennifer heard the distant thump-thump-thump of dough being punched down, except the rhythm matched her own faltering heartbeat exactly. 2 weeks minimum for the stubborn ones, Chef Whiskers said, her voice layered with the sound of purring stand mixers. She peeled Jennifer's eyelids back with fingers that smelled of lemon zest and formaldehyde. The rolling pin voids of her pupils spun faster, extruding thin ropes of dough that wrapped around Jennifer's wrists like edible restraints. The ones who lick the industrial mixers clean get it worse. Her stethoscope slithered lower, the bell pressing against Jennifer's abdomen where something moved beneath the skin in kneading motions. Jennifer's tongue unstuck from the roof of her mouth with a sound like Velcro tearing. "Get what?" she croaked. The words came out dusted in powdered sugar, her breath smelling of burnt snickerdoodles and the metallic tang of overworked appliances. Beneath her hospital gown, her ribs pulsed in time with the distant thump of dough being punched, except the rhythm was speeding up, syncing with the flickering barcode on Chef Whiskers' name tag that now read proofing stage 3, brain leavening in progress. Chef Whiskers' rolling pin pupils extruded another rope of living dough that coiled around Jennifer's ankle. "The ones who lick the mixers," she repeated, voice layered with the hum of industrial blenders. Her stethoscope slithered lower, the bell pressing against Jennifer's kneecap where the bone had begun to soften into something pliable. "They're the ones who change fastest." Behind her, the EKG machine coughed up another strip of frosting, this one piped with * cat lady candidate pound 437 star in shaky cursive. Jennifer's wrist strained against the dough restraints, which pulsed with the rhythm of a breadmaker on its final rise. Her teeth ached with the memory of licking batter from steel mixing bowls, except now she couldn't remember if those bowls had been in home EC or the nurse's office or some third place that existed between stitches. The vinyl caught beneath her sighed like a rising loaf, exhaling air that smelled of yeast and something muskier, the scent of fur matted with flour. Chef Whiskers leaned closer, her breath a warm puff of cinnamon and industrial-strength detergent. "The 2-sex ones always take longest," she murmured, her rolling pin pupils extruding thin ropes of dough that slithered under Jennifer's hospital gown. Too much duality in the batter. Her stethoscope bell suctioned to Jennifer's collarbone where subcutaneous recipe cards shuffled beneath the skin. The EKG machine whirred, extruding another strip of frosting that spelled mixture 2 wet in trembling cursive. Jennifer's left hand spasmed, fingers stiffening into whisk shapes while her right palm sprouted tiny suction cups that stuck to the vinyl caught with wet pops. Chef Whiskers nodded approvingly. "There it goes," she purred, watching Jennifer's kneecaps soften into something pliable. Through the nurse's office window, now warped like oven glass, Jennifer glimpsed Miss J in the hallway, her combat boots leaving smoking paw prints as she dragged Darren toward the industrial mixers. His apron straps had fused with his shoulders, the fabric growing a fine pelt of flour-dusted fur. The EKG machine screeched, extruding. A continuous ribbon of marzipan that spelled felonization phase initiated in wobbly block letters. Jennifer tried to scream, but her tongue had bifurcated, forked tips tasting simultaneously burnt caramel and raw chicken. Chef Whiskers stroked Jennifer's forehead with fingers that alternated between human warmth and the cold metal of pastry brushes. 2 weeks is generous, she murmured. The stethoscope around her neck twitched like a tail. The ones who nibble fondant decorations change faster. Jennifer's hips popped with the sound of cracking pie crust. Beneath the hospital gown, her skin rippled with subcutaneous embroidery, whiskers and paw pads stitched in black thread that wasn't thread at all. The vinyl cot beneath her side, exhaling air that smelled of catnip and preheated ovens. Through the warped window glass, she watched Miss J force Darren's face into an industrial mixer, his protesting screams drowned out by the machine's eager whir. His apron straps had fully fused with his spine now, the fabric growing a downy undercoat of flour-dusted fur. Chef Whisker's tail, no, stethoscope, twitched against Jennifer's thigh. The two sex ones always fight it, she murmured, rolling pin pupils extruding another rope of living dough that slithered into Jennifer's nostril. It tasted of unbaked snickerdoodles and the metallic tang of overused appliances. Too much duality in the batter. Her claw, no, fingernail, tapped Jennifer's sternum where recipe cards shuffled beneath the skin, each one laminated with edible silver ink that spelled * cat lady candidate pound 438 star in looping cursive. Jennifer's left hip dislocated with the sound of a muffin tin collapsing. Through the warped oven glass window, she watched Miss J force Tamika's face into the industrial mixer, except Tamika's screams came out as perfectly piped buttercream rosettes that spelled "Don't lick the bowl" in shaky script. The mixer's beaters whirred faster, shredding Tamika's apron straps into frayed whiskers that regrew as flour-dusted fur. Chef Whisker's tail, definitely a tail now, lashed against Jennifer's thigh. Duality breeds resistance, she purred, extruding another rope of living dough from her rolling pin pupils. This one slithered under Jennifer's hospital gown, weaving through her ribs like a baker's bench scraper. Two sex batters require extra kneading. Her claw, no question now, tapped Jennifer's sternum where recipe cards shuffled beneath the skin, each laminated with edible silver ink that spelled proofing stage 4, feline leavening. Jennifer's pelvis cracked like overbaked pie crust. Through the oven glass window, she watched Miss J press Tamika's face into the industrial mixer, except Tamika's screams came out as perfect buttercream rosettes spelling "Don't lick" in trembling script. The mixer's beaters whirred faster, shredding Tamika's apron straps into whiskers that regrew as flour-dusted fur. Weeks? Jennifer gagged around the dough invading her esophagus. Her molars ground peppermint sparks as subcutaneous embroidery stitched paw pads across her collarbones. Chef Whisker's tail, now fully furred and twitching, lashed against Jennifer's thigh. The stubborn ones, she purred, extruding another rope of living dough from her rolling pin pupils. This one slithered beneath Jennifer's hospital gown, kneading her ribs with the relentless rhythm of a breadmaker's paddle. Especially the two sex batters. Her claw, glossy black and curved like a pastry bag tip, tapped Jennifer's sternum where laminated recipe cards shuffled beneath the skin. One silver-inked card flashed "Cat Lady Candidate number 438, Duality Compromising Rise." Jennifer's hip dislocated with the sound of cracking pie crust. Through the oven glass window, she watched Miss J press Tamika's face into the industrial mixer, except Tamika's screams came out as buttercream rosettes spelling "Don't lick" in trembling script. The mixer's beaters whirred faster, shredding Tamika's apron straps into whiskers that regrew as flour-dusted fur. Weeks? Jennifer gagged around the dough invading her esophagus. Her molars ground peppermint sparks as subcutaneous embroidery stitched paw pads across her collarbones. Chef Whisker's tail, now fully furred and twitching, lashed against Jennifer's thigh. The stubborn ones, she purred, extruding another rope of living dough from her rolling pin pupils. This one slithered beneath Jennifer's hospital gown, kneading her ribs with the relentless rhythm of a breadmaker's paddle. Jennifer's hip dislocated with the sound of cracking pie crust. Through the oven glass window, she watched Miss J press Tamika's face into the industrial mixer, except Tamika's screams came out as buttercream rosettes spelling "Don't lick" in trembling script. The mixer's beaters whirred faster, shredding Tamika's apron straps into whiskers that regrew as flour-dusted fur. Soon Jenffer was back to herself with Miss J beside of her J.